So before we get back out on the doorsteps, let's give a big welcome to the leader of our party, Jeremy Corbyn.
Friends, thank you very much for that welcome. Labour depends on all of its members to deliver our message of investment and social justice in every community across Britain. Over 250,000 people joined the Labour Party in the past 18 months because they saw that Labour has broken with the failed politics of the past and that they could be part of a new project for real change. Bold, confident, and yes, angry too. Because who wouldn't be angry when they see people lying on trolleys in hospital corridors, when they see more and more homeless people on the streets of this country, when they hear about a high street chain trying to pay young people in leftover food, when huge numbers of Sure Start centres have closed under the Tories, or when class sizes are rising as the Tories divert funds to grammar schools for a privileged few. And when social care for the elderly and disabled is in crisis, while the super rich and big business get tax giveaways worth £73 billion. How can you not be angry and demand major change when life expectancy in Britain for pensioners is falling? We are a rich country, the 6th richest in the world. We're not at war. There is no epidemic sweeping our land. But whether the Conservative Party chair can face the facts or not, life expectancy has actually fallen by a year for 65-year-old women and 6 months for 65-year-old men since 2013. The truth is that the Tories are running our country down. Home ownership, opportunities for our children, wages and conditions at work, the NHS, care for our elderly, and now life expectancy. They're all going backwards, run down by a Conservative government that looks after those at the top and manages decline for the rest of us. Britain is a wealthy country, but you wouldn't know it from the way people are held back in their everyday lives, from making a home for themselves and their families, building a career, pursuing their interests and ambitions. Local councils have made a huge difference to people's lives in so many ways, providing libraries and leisure centres, schools, building houses, making sure the elderly have the support they need. But since 2010, councils have seen their funding cut by 40%. Get that figure, 40%. Over 90% of councils are putting up council tax this year to try to compensate for the huge cuts in the grant they get from government. Meanwhile, police budgets are cut, social care budgets are cut, school budgets are cut, Sure Start centres are closed, libraries are closed, necessary houses not built. Whole communities being held back, and jobs, services and hope destroyed. But it doesn't have to be like this. Labour is standing up for you in Westminster and in every community across the country. Labour councils are making a difference across the country, stepping up where the government fails to act. Give you some examples. Faced with the growing housing crisis, Birmingham Council is delivering 30% of all new homes in the city. Lancashire County Council has formed a joint venture to buy 800 affordable homes for sale and social rent. Faced with the crisis in social care, 15 Labour councils have signed up for the Ethical Care Charter for minimum standards of safety, quality and dignity of care, and improved pay and training for care workers. I signed it myself last week when I was in Blyth. Faced with so many people struggling to make ends meet, I'll give you another example. Liverpool Council has set up a not-for-profit energy company, the Liverpool Lecky, to sell gas and electricity at lower cost, building on what's been done down the road in Nottingham with Robin Hood Energy. And just west of here in Derbyshire, the Labour Council's Welfare Rights Service has helped local people claim £18 million in benefits they would otherwise have lost. Faced with the government's failure to invest in our economy, the Nottinghamshire Economic Development Capital Fund has lent £3.5 million to help more than 30 businesses secure good jobs here in Nottinghamshire. And in Northumberland, the council-owned Arch property business generates jobs and homes, as well as a return of nearly £5 million a year that supports council services like schools, roads and social care. I was really pleased to visit their Blythe Workspace site last week, which offers such fantastic opportunities. Faced with an epidemic of low pay in this country, 89 Labour councils have delivered the real living wage for council employees and contractors to ensure better wages for local people. I'm very proud that my own borough led the way on that. These are just a few examples of how Labour councils are standing up for you and why you need Labour to be in power in towns, counties and city regions, as well as Westminster. The Conservatives justify tax cuts for the richest and big business by saying they will lead to an increase in investment. But in fact, investment has fallen, leaving us with an antiquated infrastructure and uncompetitive industries. The future of our country cannot be left to the free market and the whims of the wealthy. That's why Labour will set up a national investment bank with regional development banks, including our Bank of the North, to help unlock $500 billion to fund major capital projects and finance growth. Our plan will use public investment to build up new investment by the private sector. It means creating thousands, hundreds of thousands of good quality jobs in manufacturing and in green and other cutting-edge industries of the future. Every successful business knows there's nothing reckless about borrowing to invest. Quite the opposite, in fact. Investment in infrastructure, skills, broadband and high-speed rail generates growth and generates greater tax revenues. It more than pays for itself. This is just what the Welsh Government is doing with the launch of the Welsh Development Bank, which draws on 20 years of Labour experience in power. Well done, the Welsh Government, on that. At this crucial time, we need to look to the future and ask ourselves what sort of country we want Britain to be. Theresa May's government is trying to use Brexit to turn Britain into a low-wage tax haven for big business. We're offering a real alternative that reflects the priorities of the majority of our people to rebuild and transform Britain so that no one and no community is left behind. Instead of a country run for the rich, we want to see one in which all of us can lead richer lives. A Labour government will end the rip-off on the railways and bring them into public ownership. Labour will overturn the government's ban on council-owned bus companies as part of a plan to put the public back into the buses. We'll stop the corporate tax cuts and make sure the tax dodgers pay their fair share. And we'll invest in our children's education and skills for our workers. We'll give 6 million people a pay rise by introducing a real living wage of at least £10 an hour. We will reinstate nurses' bursaries and give more people. And so giving more people the chance to train to be nurses so that the sick can get the care they need. We'll invest in housing, building the homes our country needs, creating thousands of good construction jobs and apprenticeships, and allow councils to borrow to build council housing for the future. Together, we can create a Britain where each of us can lead richer lives, investing in a better Britain, creating educational opportunity for all, guaranteeing the health and social care and mental health services you need, providing safer neighbourhoods and building homes people can afford. In the coming weeks of this campaign, Labour will be setting out more of our policies to show you how Labour will stand up for you. This election is your chance to send a message to the Tories that you won't accept our NHS in crisis. Your children's future betrayed, a deepening housing crisis, damaging cuts to the police, and insecure jobs that don't make ends meet. It doesn't have to be like this. Things can, and they will, change. So I urge all of you, think about the issues and use your vote for Labour on May the 4th. Thank you very much. Thanks, Alan.
Right, my friends, thank you very much for that, Jeremy. Jeremy's agreed to take some questions, and so I will be quite strict about this. First of all, we're going to take 3 from the media, and then we'll take 3 or 4 from yourselves. So, Paul Beard, ITV.
Yeah, Paul Brand, ITV.
Brand, I beg your pardon.
No problem.
You haven't got a beard, have you, Paul?
Not old enough for a beard just yet. Mr Corbyn, do you accept that these local elections will be an ultimate, perhaps a final test of your leadership?
These elections are a chance for us to take our case out to the country of how we want to make a fairer Britain, an investment-led Britain, a Britain that isn't in health crisis, schools that aren't underfunded, where they have to collect from the parents in order to maintain the schools' work in the normal way, that we don't have to go around the whole country seeing Sure Start centres closed and libraries closed and swimming pools restricted, all these things. We will take the case out there for what Labour councils can do and do their best in a period of austerity, but show that a Labour government will invest in the needs of people in this country, not in tax giveaways. And I'm urging people to support Labour, and our party is very strong and very active on all the doorsteps. And so this is a chance for people to elect Labour councils, but also show their rejection of the Tory way of doing things. That's what these elections are about. That is the test. That is the test for people to come out and support us.
Tony Rowe, BBC.
You've chosen Newark to launch the campaign today. There's not a single Labour county councillor in Newark. Is that a sign of optimism despite the polls and the predictions?
That's why we're here. We're here to support our wonderful colleagues on Nottinghamshire County Council and all the innovative work they've done. I've talked about their business investment, which has brought jobs to the county, and we're taking that message out everywhere because at the end of the day, the housing crisis affects everybody. Obviously, it affects the homeless sleeping on the streets of our cities. Obviously, it affects those that are living in inadequate private rented accommodation with insecure tenancies. It affects those desperately searching the housing list every week to see if they've got enough points to make a bid. It obviously affects everybody. But it also affects families that never thought they would be affected by the housing crisis. When relatively well-off families, children, can't leave home because they can't afford the deposit to rent a private place, or the rent is so high they can never afford the deposit to buy anywhere. And so we're taking that message out that this country is becoming more divided and more unequal the longer this Tory government is in office. They're more interested in tax giveaways on corporate tax cuts and income tax reductions for the very wealthiest than they are in funding the very necessary services. And we are making the point that it's local government that has paid the price and borne the brunt of austerity over the past 6 years, not the bankers who caused the crisis in the first place.
Rowena Mason, Guardian.
With, as you say, the NHS in crisis and schools suffering funding shortages and life expectancy, why are the polls showing that the Conservatives are about 20 points ahead and Labour is at its lowest
Well, I'm glad you've asked a question on life expectancy and on social care, because too often our media simply don't deal with the issues that people face day to day. There are more than 1 million people waiting for social care in this country, and there are many people stuck in hospital who frankly shouldn't be in hospital but can't leave because there's no social care available for them. And whilst the government did eventually come up with a little bit more money, it's nowhere near the needs. We've got roughly 2 billion shortfall on social care spending, and they haven't come anywhere near half of that figure of what's necessary. And so they're allowing people to suffer, forcing many people, usually women, to give up work in order to care for those in need. And so I'm not expecting or wanting an easy ride from the media. I don't care about that. But what I do care about is an obsession by so many to ignore the reality of homelessness, of social care, of NHS crisis, which simply doesn't have to be the case in modern Britain. And so these elections give us an opportunity, and I hope all newspapers and radio and TV all over the country will at least get involved in a serious debate about health, about social care, about schools, about housing. Because at the end of the day, if people grow up in poverty, particularly children grow up in poverty, they tend to underachieve in school. If they underachieve in school, they lead less fulfilling lives. If they lead less fulfilling lives that are not achieving their potential, we all lose. We lose the doctor, the engineer, the lawyer, the nurse, the teacher. We lose all of those people that could have achieved so much, which poverty held them back. It's something very sad that there's fewer working class youngsters getting into university this year than previous years, that students are leaving with such massive debts. Those are the issues that I would like to see debated during this next month of these election campaigns. So we can show that Labour councils, with all the difficulties, will do their very best to invest in communities, jobs and housing. But essentially, it's a message to the government. Stop the tax giveaways at the top and start funding the services that are necessary for the vast majority of our people.
Okay. Right, friends, I'm going to take some questions from yourselves now. I'm going to start with a young woman candidate in West Bridgford, somebody who's taking Labour into Ken Clarke's backyard, Nadia Whittam.
Nottinghamshire County Council fulfils its social care duties despite 40% cuts from the central government since 2010. But the adult social care crisis is a ticking time bomb. How will Labour tackle it?
We will tackle the social care crisis in the way that I've indicated. First of all, by proper funding of it. That is essential. But also making sure there is the closest possible cooperation between the social care providers and the National Health Service, and also raise the esteem and the pay levels of care workers, because care workers have a very, very raw deal. If you think about it, if we have a child that's in need of a great deal of care, severely disabled, child or an older person that is very frail and needs a lot of care, we're actually trusting somebody we love to the hands of somebody else. Care workers work incredibly hard, incredibly responsible, difficult job, but they're very, very badly paid. They're not even paid by most care companies for their journeys between appointments they have to make in the home. And so when I signed the Care Charter last week, I do it because I absolutely mean it. I want to see our care workers properly paid. I want to see our care providers, preferably publicly owned, running the care homes as well as they possibly can. I want to see a rigorous inspection regime. That is very, very important. But above all, I want us to, as a society, recognise that as we get older, we're going to need social care. As we, as a society, become older, there's more people going to need social care. We have to be prepared to step up and fund it. And it's a Labour government that will step up and make sure that social care is available. We won't go through this appalling scenario where people are just waiting and waiting and waiting, often alone and in misery, before they get any help whatsoever. I don't blame the councils for this. I blame a government that so underfunds them. They did a deal for Surrey. Well, if they can do a deal for Surrey, how about for the rest of the country?
I'll look over this side of the room. Colleague here.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you say, Jeremy, about funding, because it's not just about the quantity of funding, it's the distribution, because the areas that with the most need are getting hit badly by the way that this government has skewed funding for local government. Can we have a fair deal? And could I add to that and say, could we have more localism? I mean, I've been in local government for 35 years or more as an elected Labour councillor. And in that time, when the Tories talk about localism, it generally means we lose money every time. We've been asset stripped time and time again under a Conservative government. Can you guarantee us to be well funded and fairly funded in the future?
When I was in Newcastle with Nick, he gave me a map of the funding formula and the way it affects areas around the country. You could draw a map of Britain and put say, deep red, the poorest areas of the country. And you would see parts of Nottinghamshire, you'd see parts of Derbyshire, you'd see parts of the northeast, you'd see Liverpool, you'd see Birmingham, and so on. You'd see a lot of London boroughs. And then if you overlay that map with, say, the colour blue of the biggest cuts that have been made in local government grant spending, it would obliterate all of the red. It is as if there's a plan to take the resources away from the poorest areas of this country and hand them over to the others. And so what I want is a Labour government that would understand the value and importance of local government and give it the resources it needs and the opportunities it has. So, for example, not allowing local authorities to run bus companies unless they're a metro mayor seems to me short-sighted and a big mistake. Restricting their use of borrowing powers to build council housing seems to me a big mistake. Underfunding social care, which your question was about, seems to me a big mistake. And so my determination is to use these elections to put across the case for justice and equality across the whole country, but also to set out the approach Labour would take. We want to free up local government to innovate, to develop, and to transform places, because local government at its best can do things absolutely brilliantly. I mentioned Arch in Northumbria, but there are other examples around the country that are absolutely great. And so we do believe in devolution. We do believe in devolved powers to local government. We will inherit a complicated system of a combination of metro mayors and local government. Hence, we have a constitutional commission within the party looking at these issues, so that we won't set up a royal commission in 2020. We'll have a pretty clear idea of where we want to go. Because innovation, participation, is something that's very exciting to local communities. After all, council housing came from local communities. Community healthcare came from local authorities. So much came, which has become national law, from the innovative work of local government. I'm a former councillor and I believe absolutely passionately in the strength of communities together. It's not just about the formal bits of administration local government does. It's also about the way local government, at its best, can bring communities together to achieve so much more together. That's what councils are about, and that's why we're here today, supporting you.
Woman on that side.
Hello, my name's Louise Regan. I'm from Nottingham East, but I'm also a primary head teacher. And schools already are facing significant funding cuts, but the predictions in the next couple of years are going to be devastating in our schools. We'll see the loss of support staff, we'll see class sizes rising, we'll see reduction in subjects in some of our schools, and we're really concerned about that in our schools. I'd particularly like to thank Angie Rayner for the fabulous work she's already been doing defending our schools. My question is in two parts, really. My first part is what more can we do currently in terms of opposing what the government is currently doing and the cuts that they are imposing on our schools? And when we get a Labour government, what will that Labour government do to make sure our schools are well funded? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and thanks for what you do, because schools all over the country are facing some awful decisions at the present time. I visit schools quite often. You talk to head teachers, just tearing their hair out. What do you do? How many teachers do you get rid of? How many teaching assistants do you get rid of? Which subject do you cut? Which bit of land do you sell? And so on and so on and so on. And you know, at the end of the day, who loses out on this are the children, obviously. Who loses out on this are those in the teaching profession who become so stressed and so pressurised, sadly they leave the profession altogether. And these are people that have gone into teaching because they're so dedicated to the ideas behind it and what they're trying to do. So we have to recognise what's going on now is quite appalling. And the idea that you could send a begging letter out to parents and that will solve the funding crisis, well, if you live in a very well-off, quite wealthy area, some parents think, okay, well, it's only £100 a month, so what? I'll give it to help my daughter or son's school. Fine. You can't do that for everybody when you have children arriving in school who are so hungry, they're desperate for the school breakfast if there is one, and well done those schools that do it, particularly Wales, which does it for all children. Those teachers that dip into their wallets and handbags to buy food for the children, and those families that are frightened of the Easter holidays because there's no longer the free school meal available, or they've got to go to some kind of lunch club to do it. I'm fed up with Food Bank Britain and Poverty Britain. And so we will obviously invest in schools. Now, the government is investing in schools, and as I pointed out in my contribution, it is grammar schools that they're investing in. I don't want this ladder for a small number of children to get up who manage to pass an entrance exam and get to a grammar school. I want the broad staircase that all our children can go up together. All our children can learn together of the kind of community they're going to be in. And when schools have to cut down on exam choices and subject choices because they can no longer afford specialist teachers, that means the difficult choices the children have to make are made even more difficult, because if the subjects are so restricted, their career opportunities are gone before they've even reached A-levels. That is wrong, and that is a great shame. And so our policy would be to restore the strength and intervention powers of local education authorities, because I think communities of schools and communities of education working together work much better, and ensure that schools are fairly funded. So if you have a large number of children from very poor backgrounds, then you deserve more. If you have a building that is antiquated and more expensive to heat, well, obviously improve the insulation, but basically support it in the proper way so that all children get that chance. And so I want to use this opportunity to thank our teachers and teaching assistants for all the work they do, and the teams that are in those schools. And the Labour government is utterly committed to education opportunities for all children at all stages of their education career, because that is what makes the future for our country. And I really thank Angela for the work she's done and the way that we've managed to confront the Tories on the school spending crisis. And I tell you this, day by day, more and more of those letters and petitions and emails go in to rather disgruntled Tory backbenchers. So you never know. We turned them back on working tax credits. We turned them back on personal independence payments. We turned them back on national insurance contributions for the self-employed. Let's turn them back on school funding as well.
Told we've got time for one more, so colleague in the middle there.
Michael Edwards, Nottingham City Councillor. Thank you for mentioning the 40 years of economic development and innovation at Nottinghamshire County Council. Really proud of what we've done there. Thank you for mentioning Robin Hood Energy. Again, innovation, drive and focus, and this is what you get from Labour councillors. Focus on real issues. Meanwhile, 4 days after Article 50, we've got proxies for the Tory Prime Minister talking about war with Spain. Just what can we do about having a real focus on the future of Britain in Europe and what we're going to do as a Labour opposition and a future Labour government in terms of getting our relationship with Europe right?
Thank you very much for your question. I don't want a war with anybody, and I think it's better to talk to people rather than fight people as a basic principle. Secondly, the referendum produced a result. It did. We accept that result. We're Democrats. We have to now make it work. We set out our priorities on the negotiations with Europe, on market access, on protection of rights, particularly those are the most important issues. And I have built up a good relationship with Socialist Party leaders all over Europe. And whilst we have asked for and continue to ask for that all EU nationals get a right to remain in Britain, we've asked them to do the same for British nationals living all over Europe, France, Spain, or wherever else it happens to be. We have forced the government to agree. There will be a vote in Parliament at the end of it. We forced the government into regular reporting back. And we have a Brexit Select Committee that has set out its very deep concerns today already on the government's lack of a proper economic analysis of the effects of leaving the European Union. David Davis is sort of dangerously complacent on these matters. Dangerously complacent. Because if we don't get tariff-free access to the European market, we have problems over the export of manufactured goods, we have problems over services that are sold in Europe and indeed services that are imported for Europe. That is the absolute priority. So we will be continually demanding them to report back to Parliament on what they're doing. We will be continuing this very good relationship we've built up with colleagues all over Europe, and we will be holding them to account. There is no blank cheque to this government whatsoever on Brexit. We recognise we're leaving the European Union, but we're determined to make sure that workers' rights are not destroyed, that environmental protections are not destroyed, that the trade access, which is so important for our jobs and industries, is totally maintained. We will hold them to account. There is no blank cheque whatsoever for this government from Labour. We want to protect jobs, to protect rights, and we're not going to allow this government to do its ultimate threat, which is, well, if there's no deal with Europe, we'll cut corporation tax to a very low level, possibly say 12% or something like that, knowing full well how irresponsible that would be. That would damage every public service in this country even worse than they have already, and would lead to the destruction of manufacturing industry as people desperately searched for new markets. We have to be sensible and responsible about this, and that's why Keir Starmer set out these lines. That's why we've built up that relationship, and it's why I invited all of the European colleagues and unions and businesses to come to a very important conference in London on the 24th of February, which helped to build that relationship and that alliance. Yes, we're leaving the EU. We're not leaving the continent of Europe. We're going to make sure there's a good relationship with them in the future. And finally, I just say this. Every university in the country has a relationship with universities across Europe. 200,000 youngsters in this country have taken the opportunity of Erasmus schemes to go and work and study particularly in other parts of Europe, as indeed European students have come here. That's good for the universities, good for the students, good for the sharing of ideas and sharing of cultures and cultural values. That's what we're about. Thank you very much for your question.
Colleagues, can I say that's the end of this Q&A session? Can I thank members of the Shadow Cabinet for coming? Can I thank members of Parliament? Look, Gloria Di Piero's there. Sorry if I've not seen anybody else, but it's good to see our MPs here as well. And once again, can we thank Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party?